from Cogden. They live most of the summer over at Cogden, National Trust land that we rent just next door but one to our farm. The soil is wet and very vulnerable. The lovely flora we have over there is also vulnerable. And we have a lot of people walking there. It's a National Trust ground where people have nice footpaths they enjoy very much. If we chop it up completely with the cattle are fine, but the people have a horrible time wading through great depths of mud in the pathways. So it's best if they come home. There's a lot being said now about animals contributing to global warming, but at least most of the work that leads to that idea being out there is done on intensive farming. It's not equivalent. Ours is less efficient in a sense because we've got larger areas producing less food perhaps, but it's not going to be contributing to global warming in the same way.
We've divided the farm into two because we can grow so much more produce than we could possibly sell locally. So we've got one big farm which is supplying commodity products into the old system with all the merchants and food processors and supermarkets in the food chain using all the old techniques. And then we have a new farm which is very small, probably only an acre or two, so that's about a hectare, and it's got 2 employees. The other farm's got 2 employees, so it's the same number of jobs on a fraction of the size of that. Is growing fresh local food sold to local people seasonally, and that's the way forward. It's all organic, although it's not certified as organic because we can't get round to doing the paperwork. The differences between the two systems are immense. We do our very best to look after our soil.
Farming is a process of exploitation and fertility building, and I think it's really important to sort of have that in your mind when you're thinking about food production, because essentially when you produce a crop from a field, you are taking away the nutrients that have been produced, partly, yes, by the sun, but partly also by the roots of the plant in the soil, drawing up nutrients from that soil. And that is part of the process, but what it then means is that we also have to look after the soil once we've taken the crop away by having some kind of fertility building within the overall crops that we grow over a period of time, which in farming we call a rotation. And that's really the crux of organic farming, that it's not just about exploitation, it's also about fertility building, and that's really part of the normal cycle.
Very small scale, 80 acres in total, including the shop and the fishing lakes and such like, so we're probably actually farming only 60 acres of land. So really it's quite intensive, so that's the important thing of looking after the soil we got and to making sure our rotations are right, and the importance of animals in that rotation as well, returning the manure and grazing grass, and the grass tillering out the soil. It's doing what we enjoy. If you don't do what you enjoy and you've got to force yourself to do it, it's not worth doing in my mind. And we enjoy working with the staff, working on the farm, working on the land. The pride every year of planting a seed and watching it grow. Well, there's a lot of effort in that through the summer, whether it's a hot summer or a dry summer. huge pride in our potato crop this year. A lot of effort went into it in the summer months, but I'm just eager to get out there, dig in, get them in store, and I got them there for the winter.
Through the growing process, the qualities of soil end up in the plants and indeed the animals that we eat. And in reality, if we don't look after the soil, then the quality of what we eat will be affected by the practices that we follow on the soil.
One of the disadvantages of being a livestock farmer is that we have lots of muck and we cut the grass several times a year. So we're driving on the fields all the time. We can't restrict that because that's the way it is. The machinery has got bigger than it was before, but all the time on clay, you do tend to compact the soil. Now, compaction is damaging the soil, it's reducing the porous nature of the soil.
Well, when we think of what constitutes a healthy soil, we mean not just the nutrients that are important for the crops and the grasses that we grow. We also mean the structure of the soil, the living organism that it is, the microorganisms, the bacteria, the fungi, the larger organisms, the earthworms, and the structure of it itself that is able to hold water, hold nutrients and supply them to crops and animals.
Probably one of the fundamental things for all farmers is to create something that seeds will grow in. And for really the whole of history up until quite recently, that relied on turning soil over to break it down into a crumb-like structure that seeds would thrive in, and also to using that process of turning soil over to reduce weed populations.
Virtually any work in the soil is going to be damaging. On the vegetable side of things, we work really very largely with no dig, with beds where there's no digging, and that is a good way to allow all the organisms who live in the soil to continue without disturbance.
For me here, it's very much just about taking care of the soil. It's about being part of this community. It's about, I'm really excited to try and start saving seeds. And I've got a lot of the garden planted up for beneficial insects and pollinators. Choose my life to be here, and I think also like being part of a rural economy.
We have such a massive population of life living in our soil. Every time that we turn that soil over, what we're doing is really forcing everything in that soil to move house. And if we're doing that 2 or 3 times in order to create a seed bed, the sort of destruction to both the houses and indeed the lives of the soil microorganisms is quite great. And it also releases quite large volumes of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere simply by allowing greater levels of respiration of the soil. So increasingly, as farmers, we know that the less times that we turn our soil over, the better in terms of the soil microbiota, but also in terms of overall greenhouse emissions.
A lot of farmers are now moving towards a much less tillage. In fact, the no-tillage, no-till systems are becoming very popular, and for various reasons, partly the greenhouse gases. But that balance across the farm, when you're talking about if you've got some of this species-rich grassland, the herb-rich grassland is the ultimate. As I say, sort of comparable levels to sort of woodland carbon sequestering. That's the kind of balance that we're looking for on the landscape scale. Of the concept of this regenerative agriculture is to try and get that balance across the farm.
But if we want it to be able to continue to support successful agriculture, we've got to think about how we manage and maintain soil. Over time, if we don't think about it and don't do something about it, then it will be degraded. It will be degraded.
To think about what our responsibility is as farmers. We have the gift of having an area that needs to be looked after, and we have to think how we can do that best in all ways. What's best for ourselves and the people who live here and the animals we live with, and that includes not just the domestic animals, but the whole range of things which live with us. But it's also, we have a significant area, and we have to think what's the right thing for that in global terms. The balances between food production and the global need to make sure that we're not putting more carbon into the air.
Many people are surprised to learn that the agricultural and food system is one of the major contributors to the emission of greenhouse gases and therefore to climate change. Of course, a lot of emissions come from burning fossil fuels in power stations and transport systems. But actually the agricultural system draws on a lot of fossil fuel energy, partly for the manufacture of agrochemicals, but also manufacturing and driving agricultural machinery and transport and food processing and refrigeration. All of those activities use up a lot of fossil fuels. If we are to address the problem of climate change, the agricultural and food systems are going to have to be radically transformed to substantially reduce their carbon footprint and their emissions of greenhouse gases.
By sequestering carbon, what I mean is taking that carbon dioxide out of the air, which obviously is one of the major greenhouse gases that is causing our climate to warm up, and getting it into the soil. That's what plants do. Plants collect carbon dioxide during the day, take it out of the atmosphere and push it down into their roots. And through either growing trees or permanent grassland, that carbon stays put for as long as the tree is growing and for as long as the permanent grassland remains.
Even in your arable ground, can you have untilled margins? That's obviously good for the soil, it's good for catching soil runoff, but it's also fantastic foraging habitat for barn owls, for example. And, the small mammals relish that to keep grassland. It's achieving that balance, like I say, on farm, but across the landscape.
If you abuse the soil, if you just try and chuck horsepower at the soil to create a seedbed, you're wasting a lot of energy. That's not good news. I know that because we've been doing this winter cover on maize grounds for several years now, that when I watch them work the land in the spring, we make better seed beds with less passes, less number of times the tractors go over the field than we used to. That has to be successful, that has to be a good thing. Every time you go over the field with a tractor, you're using manpower, you're using fuel, and you're putting more weight on the ground, which you don't want to do. You want to keep the tractors off it as much as you can.
The state of most agricultural soils in the UK is rather poor. To a large extent, this has been because vast amounts of agrochemicals have been applied to the soils, and fertilizers that are used provide standard combination of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but they don't replace any of the other nutrients.
The sort of downside of those artificial fertilizers are twofold, really. Firstly, in the manufacture, and we're still finding out the scale of emissions from the manufacture of artificial fertilizers is huge in terms of nitrous oxide, which is even more polluting than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. So We produce emissions when we make the fertilisers. Bear in mind those fertilisers are made from a raw material which is oil. So we're using fossil fuels to make these fertilisers. And then when we apply the nitrogen fertilisers to land, we lose something like 50 to 60% of the value of it straight up into the air. So again, it's not particularly effective. Those stages, we are creating greenhouse gases which are warming our planet. We are creating greenhouse gases.
And in order for the soil to thrive, it needs manure. Manure comes with fibre in it. It comes with complete cross-section of natural chemicals which feed the worms and the bacteria in the soil. And so we do have some of that coming onto the land. And that's not too bad. But what we do have as well is huge amounts of fungicides being sprayed onto the ground. They inevitably have an effect.
At this stage you don't want it because the roots are starting taking the energy back down from the leaves again now, so that's when the blight gets taken back in the tuber. So if you can stop that and it dies off naturally on top, the blight dies off above the surface, which isn't a problem. But it's when it gets taken back down through the stem and goes in the tuber, which is when
Non-organic farmers and arable farming specifically have developed over the last 50 years with a reliance on artificial chemicals to protect crops. And generally those chemicals come into three categories. The first one is insecticides, which essentially are there to kill insect pests of the crop. Secondly, fungicides to either kill or prevent fungal infections on crops. And thirdly, herbicides used to kill plants that aren't the desired crop.
After agrochemicals have been sprayed on land and on crops, they inevitably contaminate the food that we subsequently eat. And while it's common for officials and their government advisors to say, oh, the residual levels are safe, I'm not at all convinced. On the contrary, I think there's quite a lot of evidence that even the pesticide residues in common foods are problematic. It is clear that a proper system of testing and assessment ought not to rely just on evidence from chemical companies, but also from independent scientists such as academic scientists or people working in public health institutes. And also all studies should be registered before they start, and all the evidence from all registered studies needs to be made available so that companies no longer have the option of concealing unfavourable evidence.
We know with both fertilisers and pesticides that many of them then escape from the land either through leaching into water or directly into the air and come back again and affect us in some sort of way through contamination and pollution of ecosystems, which then suffer and result in negative consequences from the agriculture itself.
Farmers have come to rely on them because they simplify their production systems. So rather than having to farm with nature, farmers have perhaps become rather used to farming and really, I would say, being in battle, in a constant war with nature, trying to eliminate all the pests that are interfering with their yields.
There are alternative ways of getting nutrients into soils through manures, composts, green manures that's growing crops that you turn back into the soil, all the suite of what would be called organic methods or agroecological methods in agriculture.
The cover crops have different advantages as well as just the structure of the soil. They also hold the soil. One of the criticisms of modern agriculture is that in the winter, heavy rainstorms washes the topsoil off down the river. As a landowner, I don't want to lose my topsoil down the river. Thank you. But also, it's bad news. It's bad for the soil. It's bad for the environment.
In terms of how artificial fertilisers and indeed livestock manures can cause pollution into watercourses, it is really important because over the last 50 years, when we really did have a love affair with applying artificial nitrogen fertilisers to our soils, where that nitrogen sits within the soil and isn't being taken up by a crop, which generally happens over the autumn months, and then when you get frequent rainfall events, which often happens over the autumn and winter, that nitrate simply gets washed out of the soil profile, goes into field ditches and ends up in watercourses. And then if that water goes to a plant which we then use for drinking water, those nitrates have to be stripped out because they're actually poisonous to people. And certainly what we're finding now from the very high levels of artificial fertiliser uses through the 70s, 80s and 90s is that we've got significant levels of nitrates in an awful lot of the water which we now rely on for drinking.
You bring everything together as well as you can. Everything is the best balance you can work out, but we're always aiming to be effectively productive within the bounds we set ourselves, which are to do with the soil structure and to do with the nature conservation.
In terms of thinking about the future and the predictions for population growth, we often get asked at the Soil Association, but surely organic farming can't feed the world. We know that the answer to that is that organic farming can feed the world, and indeed only really organic farming can feed the world, is for the following reasons. What we're seeing now with our non-organic farming methods is unprecedented levels of soil degradation. Many mainstream farming organisations would say that we have to get more efficient and we have to be more intensive. That completely neglects the need to restore soil health. So I start from that premise that where we are at the moment is not sustainable.
This impact of this huge population on the planet and on agriculture has trebled since I was born. Of that, about 1 billion don't get enough to eat and about 1 billion get too much to eat. It has an effect on the soil that has to produce the food to feed people, but also on degradation of the environment, depletion of natural resources, and climate change. It's all encompassed in one package, really. They all interact with each other. And we can look locally, and there is this argument that we should act locally and it has global effects. And we can see here in Dorset, for example, it's a very beautiful countryside. It's rolling hills. It's not suitable for industrial agriculture on a major scale, so we still have the charm of traditional-ish agriculture. However, whether that kind of approach, small-scale traditional approach, could feed large populations is doubtful.
It just raises the question, as you say, of how are we going to sort of feed all these new mouths, this increasing global population. It is a huge question. It's all to do, it comes back to the economic system, to the amount of food that we waste, to the way that people value food now.
freedom from the world, as it were. I enjoy every minute I spend up here, hard work or not. I love it, I really do. Strong passion for gardening.
I spent a lifetime working on human rights issues, and in the last 15 years I've come to realize that unless you're looking at environmental rights, you might as well forget about human rights, because the way the environment is being attacked right now is such as to destroy the potential for real human rights for our children and our children's children.
I think it's very important that everybody should be linked to the earth. I think that the earth feeds us. Without it, we wouldn't be here. And I enjoy that contact with the earth. I like the fact that I don't wear gardening gloves. There is that link directly between the soil and me, and that means something to me. I get pleasure from that, healing.
From being concerned about torture and racism and those fundamental issues of human rights, and now moving through to food which is actually nutritious and at the same time not destroying the beautiful countryside, because the soil is being degraded, because the nutrients that should be in that soil are gradually being leached out of it in the name of profit.
I think that the soil is probably the most important part of any garden. There's very little of it in terms of depth. And to make it, you can only make it at about half an inch a year.
To say the George saw the light and released the prophets without a fight, but those prophets flowed freely in his true blue veins. He never would agree to release his net gains.
Stories in particular have this way of sort of passing on knowledge and affecting our thinking in very subtle ways. So rather than directly telling someone, oh, you shouldn't be doing that, you should be using less pesticide, or you should be eating less starchy foods, or whatever it is, the story kind of explores ways in which how have we treated the land. So a good example we've been talking about recently is August. The month of August is about the celebration of the corn harvest, the grain harvest, really, and that leads us through to think about bread, and it leads us to think about the beginnings of the whole season of fruitfulness, the autumn and the crops being harvested. But it also makes us think about thankfulness and what are we giving back.
We, I feel, provide the landscape. It's the story behind views, things like that, in terms of what farmers have done in the past and what they're doing now. One of my favourite views is from the A35, looking out through to Burton Brasdock, down through the valley there, and that is a picture of different patchwork of different enterprises, cows, sheep, buildings, and that. It just makes up one of my best views. And then, like I say, farmers add to that, and there's a story behind every field and every crop, and the landscape changes, and that's a precious part of West Dorset, and not just West Dorset, but of Great Britain.
The question about landscape is so much about how we choose to make landscape. We tend to think there is a given beautiful British landscape or English landscape, but actually at every stage along the way we're choosing things. There's a lot to be said for a choice which is very different from the choice that we tend to make in Britain at present.
The Dorset area of outstanding natural beauty is a protected landscape. It covers about 40% of this county, and it's one of the larger ones in the country. There are 37 in England. They're landscapes that have been protected for their natural beauty so that people can enjoy them and so that that natural beauty can be passed on for future generations. And the natural beauty within them is not just natural, it's very much including man's part in that nature. They're shaped by man, they're often rural landscapes around which our conservation work hangs.
We could be getting a lot more food from our land. We work in smaller holdings. It produces a completely different landscape. It would need a landscape of smaller fields, of more shelter belts, of more row crops instead of big expansive fields. And it's a question of what we want.
With the farmers, often what we do a survey of the land. Some of the work is targeted, like wildflower meadow restoration, and other kind of work is countryside stewardship, which is a form of a whole farm management plan, brings in all sorts of options, capital works that again will assist the farmer in cherishing, bringing on wildlife habitat.
The landform and land shape and landscape comes from that geology beneath us, and where the geology meets the air, the soil is very important. So the soil dictates natural habitat that would form there. The chalk grasslands, the heathlands, the acid grasslands that are dotted all across this county, dependent on the geology underneath.
We can think about how the land needs to be respected through traditions such as wassailing, which is a massive part of our community still. You know, this is quite an old ceremony. It happened for hundreds of years for cider makers, for those who grow their apples in orchards. But it's still vibrant. Today it's in the darkness and the depths of winter. People gather, they want to be together, but they want to sort of say, you know, this is our land where our food, our apples, our juice, our cider comes from. Let's stand together with those trees in the dark time and think about how we want that to continue.
Every farmer I meet is sort of, has their favourite corner of the land. They're full of sort of sightings that they've had over the years. And to celebrate that and to keep that acknowledgement of wildlife and the sort of presence of it and the beauty of it sort of in the ether.
The fact that humans are part of nature, I think, is important to understanding how that serves us rather than this separation. Looking at conservation effort across the country, we do that for benefit to ourselves, whether it is by cleaner landscapes or places for healthier recreation, or species that may be exploitable, or species that are an important part of a food web that we rely on ultimately.
This time of year, there's great, songs that celebrate the harvest. I have fields, I have flowers, I have orchards and bowers, and the lark is my morning alarmer. So jolly boys now, it's Godspeed the plough, long life and success to the farmer. The story goes on to say things like, the wealthy and great in their landed estates, I envy them not and declare it. For I raise my own lambs, I have chickens and hams, I shear my own fleece and I wear it. It's that kind of sense of, we've got a landscape that is provided us with things, and we still connect with it. We still know where it comes from.
So my job entails everything right from the very beginning, from planting the trees to their final process of felling and extracting them. But that management is not only about the product at the end, whether it be firewood, whether it's timber to be used on the estate. It's also about management of the landscape and keeping those woodlands healthy and a varied habitat, or a mosaic of habitat. So it's for a wider good as well, not just purely for the benefit of the estate. It's actually for the landscape as well.
When I came home to help my father nearly 30 years ago, he told me that when he was a boy there were about 100 people working on the land here on our farm. So they were maintaining the landscape all the time. They were chopping the hedges, which is absolutely essential because you lose the wildlife when you get rid of the hedges, because they're refuges for the alpine wildlife, all the lovely flowers that come out in late summer. To me, it was obvious that in order to have a farmed landscape that looked good, we need more people to work and be in the land.
Another of the things I like to talk to the farmers about is hedgerow management and just maintaining the integrity of those boundaries. Again, farmers haven't necessarily got the time to do at the moment. It's something that we've had funding to do recently in laying hedges and creating that thick base. But it's not just nesting habitat and the foraging habitat that hedgerow represents, but it's also the refuge for beneficial insects.
We do our best to do what we think is right and beautiful, but people might have different views on what that should be. There's no clear right or wrong. We aren't creating a natural landscape, we are creating a chosen landscape, which I hope is one which other people like as well as we do. There's a beauty about it being utilitarian. The trees which shelter the cattle and shade the sheep are lovely. And because we're by the sea, they have a different sort of loveliness. They have this amazing windswept shape, which is so distinctive and so lovely. But it's a response to our environment, and the interaction between our choice and the elements and the needs of the animals and the needs of the crops is an interplay.
Aldo Leopold wrote that humanity needs to move on from being conqueror of the land community to plain member or citizen of it. Our place in this great ecological environment we call the planet Earth. A French philosopher, Michel Serres, has argued that throughout the course of human history, we've really only ever focused on a social contract. Not an actual written contract, but we've focused on human social relations and how they should be and what we should do. And in doing so, we've completely ignored the environment, nature. And he argues that what we need is a natural contract to sit alongside the social one that recognises our place as just one species on a very beautiful planet.
Chalk grassland in West Dorset is a fantastic habitat. We like to call this kind of grassland well ground. That's a phrase some of these old boys use. It's these deep-rooted herbs drawing up minerals and trace elements from lower soil horizons, so that they'll have anti-worming properties, antibiotic properties, some say. And the idea of well ground is an animal's looking a bit off colour. This well ground, or in Wales they call them hospital fields, and it's self-medication. They'll be back on track in no time, and it's well ground for us humans. The well-being benefits of walking through that grassland full of colourful wildflowers, buzzing with insects. The swallows and martins are diving around, feasting on those insects. So it's good for our well-being. It's good for those flowers which are now quite rare, the invertebrates which relish that, and the species that prey on the invertebrates.
We try wherever possible to keep that to a sort of low impact forestry. By low impact, it's trying to look at other options rather than heavy machinery or things that will damage the floor. I mean, obviously we need to use heavy machinery. I use a tractor regularly and winches and so forth, but wherever possible, if we can use systems that don't have an impact or a heavy impact on the environment, that's brilliant. What tends to happen with the lower impact is that we are seeing a better regeneration of trees, of young trees, and again for the sort of everything from the invertebrates up.
Our current herd, as they are now, are very good at their job, which is partly, as I say, the meat production, but also the conservation work they do, because they eat with interest and pleasure all the different range of plants we have growing at Cogden and also here at Tamarisk Farm. In doing so, they allow the development of a really good mixed flora, which is just full of lovely species of plant. It's a great pleasure to watch them enjoying choosing food, choosing the good grasses, the good flowers, the things they want to eat, and in doing so, allowing it to continue, allowing it to develop and allowing it to grow as we want it to.
The Eat Lancet Commission that came out in January 2019 concluded that we don't need to plough up more land. We can actually use existing land, so much of which is growing crops on a mass scale to then feed to cattle. And cattle are very inefficient converters. The figures don't add up unless we stop ploughing up more land. That's because we need unploughed land for biodiversity. If we turn everything to the interests of us humans, basically the planet stops functioning.
We do need to change our diets. And that's not to say that it's a headlong move towards veganism, not at all, because grazing livestock are also important both for landscape and for soil health. We move to a diet which is much higher in fruit and vegetables and replaces intensively produced meat with lower amounts of much better quality meat coming from primarily forage-based diets.
We struggle to the point more or less of failure in looking after the wildlife. Although we don't use pesticides anymore, we encourage the ladybirds and the spiders to eat the other pests. We're still using nitrogen fertilizers and we're still using fungicides which kill the fungus. But the overall effect appears to be that birds, which are the good indicator of what's actually going on, are in decline.
Pesticides and herbicides are intended to kill insects, to kill plants, and they also affect the broader environment, not just the fields to which they're applied. And as a consequence, we have seen and continue to witness serious reduction in biodiversity in our countryside.
I think what's happened is we've all just got used to the fact that our fields have got quieter over the last 20, 30 years and just not really appreciated what's gone on. I mean, I'm very lucky. I was born and brought up on a farm, and at that time there were lapwings everywhere, and you just never thought about the diversity of wildlife. In fact, to be honest, you would think sometimes of some of that diversity as being a hindrance.
We hear these big stories about of species reduction. A classic statistic is 97% loss of wildflower meadows since the war, which is it's just it sort of brings it home. It's a hard-hitting statistic, but you just think of all the sort of the knock-on effects of that. So the invertebrate loss. There have been winners. We've seen certain species are still relishing the environments that we have. With that meadow decline statistic, there's no doubt that the impact that we're having is driving habitat loss, which is then sort of driving this species loss.
Just the back-breaking work that they had before the introduction of some of the chemicals that farmers used. And I can understand why farmers would have just, said, great. Because they wouldn't have thought of the unintended consequences. They'd have no way of knowing what those were. And certainly the people selling them the products probably didn't know themselves, but it certainly wasn't in their interest to find out.
In the past, there was a belief that governments could invest in major projects for the common good. And that worked to a large extent, but it was run or powered by governments or charitable institutions. Now everything is in the hands of private industry and is run for private profit. And so the argument that some people make against GM or high-tech agriculture, that it's done for the profits of these big companies. Now that, to my mind, is more an argument against capitalism than against the technology per se. You can use the internal combustion engine to drive ambulances or buses to get people to school. You can use it to kill people. These technologies are in the hands of huge multinational companies. That concentration in predominantly private hands is deleterious in two ways. One, in terms of the products that are produced and who actually is going to benefit from them, the small farmers, the consumers, the health of our well-being, or the profit for their shareholders. I don't think it is the devil's work. It is the devil that is using it for its own work.
The destruction of the environment on a systematic fashion in the name of profit is something that you would expect the law to have something to say about. One of the things that you can do is, as a government, regulate what people are allowed to do that is damaging to the soil, is damaging to the land, is damaging to the food that is being produced. And that's where governments fail in their responsibility time and time again, because could it be money?
Looking at the agricultural methods that surround our woodlands, they are intrinsically linked together with the species and also hedgerows that run between them. What happens in the fields and the way we're farming, without doubt, will have an impact on the woodlands. But I think overall the farming systems that I've worked in and been involved in, the organic method seems to have a far broader spectrum of species that you're seeing on the farm. And that boils down to ultimately soil health. Soil is the bottom line. If you've got good soil and healthy invertebrates, everything will build from that. And I think that is the key. That is one of the keys. Yeah.
I've been involved for the last 6 years in a campaign to stop a massive housing development at Verse Farm, which is just on the outskirts of Bridport. In total, there will be nearly 1,000 houses placed on exclusively an area of outstanding natural beauty.
As far as development within areas of outstanding natural beauty goes, there is a duty of regard that the local authorities must have. There's a duty of regard to the purposes of designation, that is conserving and enhancing natural beauty. Unfortunately, it has come to be that the policy driver for development has overridden the policy driver for conservation and enhancement of natural beauty in particular places.
But there is a tyranny in this. Local government has been pressurised to demonstrate it has got what is called a 5-year land supply. In reality, those figures are twice the number of houses that are actually needed. In reality, the developers often choose the easy option, which is to build on farmland. And what we do know, we're putting concrete and houses forever on what is good farmland at a time when the supplies of food, both nationally and internationally, are becoming much more questionable.
Another one of the factors in habitat decline is, of course, development, house building, road building, and not only the land that's taking up severe habitat devastation, but the connectivity that's breaking up as well. So it's not just the wildlife, it's the other public goods we've been talking about. So the potential flooding, this water just running so far off, literally tarmac to ground.
We would look for sustainable growth, intelligent planning of that. And that does require an interplay between planners, local authorities, people empowered to take decisions, but to take decisions on behalf of people in an informed way. And that does not require them to bend those decisions in favour of large-scale developers.
We're lagging behind in terms of incorporating renewable energy sources, so solar panels and sustainable drainage systems, which would make these developments a lot more wildlife friendly, both in local terms and in trying to combat climate change, which does seem to be having such a major effect on wildlife and on a much wider scale.
One of the things that really drives me is a desire for my two daughters to have the opportunities in the countryside that I had as a child, and the ability to have a bit of freedom to roam, the ability to disappear into woods or downland or marshes or whatever there is around, undamaged by the human activities around them.
Academics like me like to say that policy and politics changes because of evidence. We love to say the evidence that we produce then informs policy and policy shapes the world. It's not true. I, looking across food history, have concluded that it's social movements that make change. Evidence fits into social movements. Evidence gets used by social movements. Evidence gets argued by and through social movements. But that role of social movements, people in their everyday lives, has been underestimated, in my view. The shape of the British countryside wasn't made by evidence, it was made by political actions, by classes of interest determining what others did. And the fight back shaped what then happened as well. Unions formed, people revolted, there were riots, there were crises about technology, but I don't see that general rule as any different today. It's social movements which shape the shape of the food system.
For something like 95% of human evolution has relied on being part of a community, working together, solving problems together, not being individual. Many hunter-gatherer tribes, and for the vast majority of human evolution, individuals have been ostracised from the tribe because they were not part of the group survival. Once we settled down and started farming and greed started growing, we focused on that one part of humanity and somehow developed it into that is what humanity is about. And we've completely lost track of what actually makes us human, and that is our sense of community.
A lot of what needs to be done is to think about how to get people within a geographic region to collaborate and to feel as though they're part of the same collective enterprise. So you put the effort into the transformation of social relations. You put the effort into facilitating, bringing people together to realise that they can have some collective understanding. Doesn't mean to say everyone has to think the same or be the same, but in a particular sphere of their life they're collaborating. And that collaboration can lead to more productive agriculture with these environmental benefits as well. Actually, when those work well, people quite often say, well, we're organised to do this. Maybe we get very interested in something completely different and work on it together. And those models of social capital creation have also been part of the emergence of sustainability in agricultural landscapes across the world.
Changing we to me and atomisation. It's, I think, one of the prevailing myths of neoliberalism is the idea of over-accentualised individualism. And that feeds into the greed.
It's very easy to bash business. It's very easy to knock business. It's very easy to knock everybody. Domestic UK politicians of not being of sufficient calibre to withstand the lobbying power of business. But business is part of the solution as well. They just need to be dealt with. Like when you suck with the devil, you use a very long spoon. You need to be aware of what you're dealing with, which is naked self-interest.
We come back to the same issues as fossil fuels, the same issues as big pharma, profit that is purely in the interest of making money and is nothing to do with what is good for human beings. It's a moral issue. Yeah, it's a moral issue. It's a very important moral issue. But it's also an issue of rights and the law. The International Criminal Court makes it a crime against humanity to destroy the environment.
Increasingly, non-organic farmers are coming to understand that they can farm without these chemicals. And I've been really heartened recently to have conversations with large-scale, non-organic arable farmers who have managed to farm without insecticides. And they are telling me stories about just how the balance of beneficials and predators in their fields is changing, so that they're actually now seeing that possibly all the products they've used in the past weren't as essential as they'd been led to believe.
Wildlife encounters are bring the world to life for me, so that I can I'll often stand out in the evening, and just think back to the wildlife encounters I've had during the day, and the enrichment, and that's the way I'd like to think it might work. But a big part of it is rewilding the mind.
We're part of that. We need to understand how we can fit in and make and work with it rather than working against it or trying to control it. And I think that's a much bigger discussion.
We use all organic stuff, or as much organic stuff as we possibly, purely because from the fact that I want to know what's going in the food. I don't want any hidden nasties. The amount of stuff that people hide in food is supermarket loaves. They put on the actual label enzymes, but they don't actually have to tell you what it is. And one of these enzymes was pig's stomach lining. That they put in it, and they've been feeding Jewish people and Muslims and been buying this processed supermarket loaves. They didn't know they'd been eating pork. Well, they didn't have to explain to them they'd been eating pork. It's like, how can you get away with that? And that's just one of the ones they named. God knows what the stuff was that they didn't name.
January, still we're living off the previous autumn's winter cabbage and stored root vegetables like our potatoes. Polytunnel crops start to be sown end of January, February time, and then going on we go out stores hopefully in April if the weather permits and start sowing seeds and beetroot outside, salad leaves, lettuce transplants outside. Potatoes go in April and then harvested early is a harvest end of June. July the second early is the wilges and the soft fruit, and then we've got the beans and things that come through in August. October time onwards we're concentrating on storing all the potatoes back in the barn.
When we're spud digging, potato digging, I love that time of year. Most of the time it's our family out, me, my mum, my sister and my dad, Dad drives a digger with grey sorting on the back, and I drive the traction trailer next to it, collecting all the spuds.
And over the winter we live off the Tuscan cabbages, the kales, savoys and purple sprouting, which has come through in January time, just after Christmas. So that's kind of our year.
Mum and Dad tell me mostly about what the potatoes are good for and what cabbage tastes like and stuff like that. So I get to learn from my parents.
Every year you think, do I do this again next year? But the little seed you plant in February, March, April time that grows and just relights that passion for another year.
I feel very privileged to have grown up on a farm. You get exposed to so many different things, and I guess life as well. I see it through my own children now, having 2 young children, and it's just amazing to see how much they have learned and what they know already about the life cycle of animals and plants, and just the freedom, being able to get on your bicycle outside your front door and just go for a bike ride up the track. It's a real privilege, I think, is my main feeling about growing up on a farm. We produce a high percentage of our products here on the farm, and we also have a retail outlet where we sell them directly. We're only dictated to by the general public who are buying it to consume it. We're not dictated to by large companies that we've got a contract with to produce X amount of whatever the product may be, and that if it's not up to scratch, drop you like a stone.
I came from other industries where I dealt direct with my customers. Whereas here I noticed that farmers, and my father in particular, and the business that I then got involved with, didn't deal direct with the customer. There was always an intermediary, and sometimes that intermediary also was your supplier who sells raw materials that the farmer needs to grow the crops and even feed to their animals. And then that same business, or a very similar one, will be buying the product that the farmer grows. And the farmer is stuck in a vice and not able to negotiate his own price. He's not able to create his own products to sell to his customers. He's just growing commodities. It makes it very difficult for the farmer to grow what he really wants to do and create good quality food for the customer. He's just someone running a sort of factory almost, a captive in the good old-fashioned sense, and he sold his soul to the company store.
Thinking about how the price of food has changed over the last 20, 30, 40 years, it's really a sobering thought to think now that the price of food in the UK is around about the 4th lowest across the world. And as a nation, the proportion of our total income that we devote to our food is less than 10%. If we think back to the beginning of the 20th century, it would have been over 50%.
At this point, don't intend to have children. I don't. So it's okay. I mean, it's not. Anyone who works for me, I pay £8.75, which is, as far as I understand, the statutory limit. Well, it might be slightly over the minimum wage. I would love to pay anyone who works for me £10 an hour. I would love to pay myself £10 an hour. And I think it's possible.
I find the increasing inequalities in income and wealth and health outcomes and diet and nutrition to be not just undesirable, but morally intolerable. And I think that they're also, in the long run, counterproductive for our society. One of the complaints often made by economists of the UK economy is that our productivity is substantially lower than other competing countries. And I have not the slightest doubt that that in part is a consequence of the ill health that in turn is a consequence of poverty.
Particularly in the UK and in developed countries, we have moved away from having illness that's caused by infections or from diseases or not enough food to eat. We're increasingly being affected by the role of processed foods, of large amounts of calories, of a much less active lifestyle.
Since I stopped working, I've become more aware of the fact that many people don't have enough to live on and are struggling, and so I got involved here about 3 years ago. It's a great feeling to be able to help people through hard times.
It's a community in itself, you know what I mean? When we come here, we have a chat, we have a laugh, we have whatever, you know what I mean? And it's just like, it's where everybody meets up. I mean, like, I know this guy.
So I saw this woman there and I thought she's obviously working there or something. Turned out she wasn't working there, she was getting food, and asked if I could sign her on again. So I filled in the form for her. She's a midwife. She's in the 3rd year of her degree. She's got 3 children, she's a single parent, and they've stopped the funding. So she cannot afford to eat, literally. And she's about to finish an amazing degree. We need nurses so badly. And yet, nothing's been done to help her. That is lunacy. It's just madness. She said she will finish because she's got herself in debt over it. But but as a result, she can't eat properly.
We know the objective data say things are very bad on climate change, on water, on biodiversity, on public health, on social inequalities through food. Food poverty is rampant. Universal credit is making it a terrible imposition on people. They're going into debt, they haven't got enough money to feed themselves. Use of food banks is rocketing. This is not a good place for the 5th or 6th richest food economy in the world to be in, but that's where we are.
It takes a lot of courage in some respects for folk to come into food bank where you're in a public place where everyone can see that you are accepting, in the old term, charity. The reality is some of our clients are working, and in this world where the high finance people talk about millions of dollars, millions of pounds, etc., the folks who actually feel the effect of all these cuts are actually the folk that we see in food.
179, please, 179.
Where they are working, they're all on low paid wages. And my answer to folk who say these are scroungers, with folks who are on benefits, and particularly now with universal credit kitting in, you'll be standing in line with these folks. And you have to recognise that what we do here in Food Bank is only a little bit towards what should be happening in the real world.
People are in a poverty trap, so you get worn down, your energy goes, your will to live almost, because you're constantly working against something.
For me, the number one issue is inequalities in Britain. In an unequal society, access to food, confidence, capacity to choose, to experiment, to try out things, to live and eat differently, to get pleasure from food, not just seeing it as fuel. That's all shaped by social class. I mean, to the outside world, Britain is a class-ridden society.
Tax breaks are going to the wealthiest in society. They're going to corporate giants. So the poor are getting poorer. Median incomes haven't risen in 20 or so years. So we've got a structural problem in society. Inequalities are growing. I don't think there's too many places in the Western world where we see inequalities narrowing. It just isn't happening. But in places like the United States and the United Kingdom and other Western countries, it's only going in one direction. And we're seeing that the health inequality, the ability to not live quite a long life, the inability to have a disability-free life, that too is separating. I mean, it's following the socioeconomics. That's the driver. So ultimately, it's a social movement we need.
Particularly in the UK and in developed countries, we have moved away from having illness that's caused by infections or from diseases or not enough food to eat. We're increasingly being affected by the role of processed foods, of large amounts of calories, of a much less active lifestyle.
Food is both a fantasy world, 30, 40 hours on TV of chefs tantalizing and competitions tantalizing you with totally unaffordable foods and tastes and experimentation. And on the other hand, the reality of very big companies, increasingly American companies, trying to sell you cheap pap, which is tasty, sweet, fatty, lovely instantaneously, but makes you obese and you die early.
It's not just related to what we eat, obesity. I think it's related to our social situation, our level of education to some extent, and motivation. There's different reasons why you may or may not feel motivated. Certain foods make you crave other foods, and so that's a vicious cycle.
Right now, the inequality in Britain is as bad as I've ever known it in my lifetime.
Support for social care has just evaporated in the last few years. People are just sort of wandering around with no overall support, and so this is one leg, if you like, of the stool that keeps them going.
Diet is one of, if not the major cause of premature death. And you could say, well, okay, fine, who cares if I die age 62? The problem is, before people die age 62, they have what the doctors call morbidity problems. They have not just mortality problems of life, death, but worse quality of life due to poor health. And food is the major driver of that.
People on lower incomes spend much more of their household income on food, but a lot of people think food is now relatively cheap, but it's not. Food is expensive. We pay for it 3 times. You pay at the till when you buy the thing. You pay a second time to clean up the environmental mess, the externalities, and you pay for those through taxes, through your water bills, through other kinds of systems to clean up the problems that have been created. And you pay for it a third time through the subsidies and support that governments give to agricultural systems. When you add that up, you end up saying food is actually expensive.
You walk around town and you see folks, and without getting melodramatic, your heart breaks for them, you know. It's this thing about, it's the parable about the Good Samaritan in real terms. It's easier to walk away. It's easier to cross the road, walk away and deny it exists.
People very quickly come to a stage where they're just not able to function properly anymore, and they need somebody to help them.
We share the ground with these people.
Food banks are an indication that things have gone badly wrong. They're a hand to help people out of the mire, if you like, but they're not helping people get onto dry land and get themselves back together. That's what's missing.
When it comes to food, a lot of people have not given the right information, so they go all the way through their lives just not knowing what the right things are to eat. You get other people who have got the right information, but they don't have the money to do anything about it.
There's an epidemic of obesity, certainly in America, and we're catching up with America. And although there's a lot of programs on food and how it impacts us, and there's lots of psychoeducation out there, I think some people might feel so helpless and hopeless about changing their situation that they may not choose to watch these programs, or they think it doesn't apply to them, or they've given up.
Okay, there's actually a fourth way that we pay for our food, and that's in the result of the choices that we ultimately make about the food that we eat. Now, those choices are not necessarily free choices. They're constrained by our own resources or our choices, or they're strongly shaped by advertising or other kind of corporate interests to encourage us to eat certain sorts of foods rather than other ones.
What I think people don't realise, and what we talk about a lot, is why we buy things. Why is it that we think that what is being sold to us in a package is actually safer than something that comes from the milkman or from our breasts in the case of infant feeding? Why is it that we actually put so much trust into a packaged product?
The result of that is a large amount of ill health worldwide now is related to the kinds of food that we do eat. 25 years ago, the number of people in North America who were obese was 6%. It's now over 35%. In the UK, 25 years ago, it was 3%, and it's now above 25% of adults. And that's a single generation change. 25 years is a blink of an eye in human history. But in that period, we on average, as individuals, carry much more weight because of a result of the food that we eat.
Departing from the 1970s, there was a very strong stance about what food people should eat. And one of the key principles that we started out with was that you should not have fat in your diet, because heart disease relates to clogged arteries, and clogged arteries, we think, come from fat. What we now know, 50 years on, is that fact, that the idea that fat is bad for you, has essentially not been borne out. There were parts of businesses that had a necessary vested interest in wanting that advice to go that way. We are now seeing documents being released about the role of the sugar lobby and also the cereal industries. Basically, as a consequence of this single piece of legislation, a wholesale change in the way humans on a planet-wide scale started to eat.
You get hooked on sugar. I know that. I went through a phase when I was eating far too much sugar. It is addictive. All these things are addictive. That is what happens, and they know it. And the corporates behind it know exactly what they're doing in the way that they sell it to us.
What we now know is that with the changes in the diet that we made from the 70s onwards, with the introduction of increasing amounts of sugar and refined carbohydrates. On a population level, more and more people required more and more insulin to deal with that sugar input. And this was happening not only to adults, but to children and even to babies.
Commerciogenic malnutrition, and that means you actually harm or die because of commercial practices.
The problems with diet and health in this country apply both to the production of food, its processing, its marketing, and its consumption. And all of those are linked together.
I just want to make sure that the companies themselves stop misleading parents, trying to get legislation in place that literally lays down really clear guidance and actually rules about what companies can and cannot do.
And in the commercial side of food systems, there's self-interest certain people have to encourage us to buy their foods, and they get very good at selling those stories, of creating them and selling them and making them emotional so that we feel that we should buy and eat certain sorts of things because they'll make us better people. The challenge is that we haven't been able to apply a similar sort of principles enough when it comes to thinking about other sorts of food systems, about why allotments are good or community gardens are good, or why a plate with 5 different colours on it is good, or whether vegetarian food in this form rather than that form is good, because there's not quite the self-interest to allow that to become a kind of commercial entity. So the challenge is how you create those stories, and I think one of the ways is to shorten the food system, to shorten the point from production to consumption.
This interrelation between population, agriculture, resource depletion, species extinction and climate change, sometimes it's difficult to see how they're all interlinked. I think the main driving force behind these problems is us. We want more than our fair share. The power to change things is not in the hands of those who want to do work for public good. It's in those that do it for private profit. And these days, these companies are so powerful and have their tentacles everywhere that they can move around the world to wherever the tax regime is more favourable to them, or they can influence governments to facilitate a favourable tax regime. The problem is that these vested interests don't want those changes to occur.
Food is big business, very, very big business. Just like oil, just like gas, these are substances that really are all about money as far as the big manufacturers are concerned. We know what we need to do. We know what we should be putting in our bodies. We know what we should be doing to the land. And the really smart people who run those big businesses know it better than anybody because they've been studying this for years. And so when you know that the quality of the food that's being produced is actually damaging the people that it's destined for, it's a bit like saying that you're poisoning them. And there are laws against poisoning. You can prosecute a CEO, you can prosecute the very highest board members of those companies. I am certainly not going to tell you that the law is the solution for all of these problems. And there are clearly cases where the companies control the courts to the extent that individuals have got very little chance of winning against them. And there's a clear link between the right to a clean, healthy, safe and nutritious environment that really is all about human dignity. But isn't that really what we all want?